This morning's inflation print raising some fresh questions for the Fed and, of course, the timeline of potential rate cuts ahead. We want to bring in our Steve Leisman with his take on the print, having had a couple hours here, Steve, to dig through some of the internals.
Yeah, and Carl, I don't think the Fed is going to be as freaked out about this number as perhaps the market is. I don't think also, Carl, it's time to write off the idea that inflation is going to be slowing from here. There's a lot of January effects in here. The problem is I can't be proved right about this for another month or two.
To fail, perhaps. Charlie, I want to go back to what we've seen taking place more broadly in the market. And CPI yesterday wasn't the trigger for it, but it helped accelerate it. And it's the fact that the first time this year, we've got markets pricing in just 4 interest rate cuts for 2024. 6 weeks ago, that was 6 interest rate cuts that were being priced in. And perhaps most importantly, the timing of that first rate cut is pushing out in the Fed funds futures market to June. How much does the timing matter, especially when we are talking about value, or we're talking about even some of the more cyclical parts of the market that could become compelling in the midst of rate cuts?
Short answer, it doesn't matter at all. 5 years from now, we're not going to care whether the Fed cut for the first time in April, May, or June. They're going to cut in one of those 3 months, and it's just not going to matter in the long run. In the short run, the market does care, and the market is very efficient. It gets a lot of things right, but the one thing it does wrong is overweight the short term.
Inflation, both in the United States and globally, has emerged as a significant concern, reaching levels that have not been seen in years. While inflation is a natural and expected part of any economy, the recent acceleration has raised alarm bells among policymakers, economists, and consumers alike. In the United States, inflation has reached an all-time high in 4 decades, with the Consumer Price Index, CPI, rising at an alarming rate.
Francis Carrefour, with thousands of locations in 30 countries, will no longer be taking some Pepsi products and several other brand names to protest what the company considers to be unacceptable price hikes. The move shows that consumers might be approaching a breaking point. I want to bring out our next guest for more on this, Clarence Otis, who is the former Darden Restaurant CEO. And Clarence, we have been looking at more than 2 years of extreme inflation when it comes to food prices, not just in grocery stores, in restaurants and beyond. What do you think the situation is at this point, just in terms of the consumer ability to continue to take any more?
For sure, despite the fact that there really is strong employment levels and solid wage growth, many consumers definitely are feeling the pressure financially. You can look across the board at the major spending categories. So food inflation, rents have escalated, fuel costs, they're muted right now, but consumers know that they're volatile and they can spike at any time, and so that weighs. And then when it comes to their digital lives, so think about connectivity, content, devices, those are taking a bigger and bigger share of consumer budgets. And so moves like these are not surprising, I think.
This rapid increase in pricing has affected a wide range of goods and services, from necessities like food and electricity to luxury items like electronics and clothing. The cost of living has risen significantly for many households, putting a strain on budgets and reducing purchasing power. Globally, the scenario is similar, with many countries facing high levels of inflation, where supply chain interruptions, commodity price surges, and growing demand have all contributed to global inflationary pressures. On top of that, inflation has had a significant impact on emerging markets, escalating current economic issues and increasing the possibility of social unrest. At the forefront of this discourse stands the Federal Reserve, the venerated institution tasked with steering the nation's monetary policy. Observing the inflationary tide swell to historic proportions, the Fed finds itself at a crossroads, compelled to contemplate a series of interest rate hikes throughout the year 2022. So, in today's video, let's take a look into how inflation affects the U.S. and global economy, and why does the Fed's decisions really matters. Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell's emphasis on tightening interest rate policy to bring inflation back down to the target rate of 2%, which reflects the Fed's overarching objective of maintaining price stability and fostering a conducive environment for economic expansion. Inflation, when allowed to accelerate unchecked, can erode the purchasing power of consumers, disrupt business planning, and undermine overall economic confidence. Therefore, the Fed's commitment to reining in inflation is grounded in the belief that stable prices are essential for sustained economic growth. The Fed's key instrument for attaining its goals is the federal funds rate. This interest rate is used as a benchmark for borrowing costs across the economy, influencing everything from mortgage rates to corporate borrowing rates. Adjusting the federal funds rate allows the Fed to effectively control the cost of credit, influencing consumer spending, business investment, and overall economic activity. For instance, let's consider a realistic scenario where inflation begins to outpace the Fed's target rate of 2%. In response, the Fed decides to raise the federal funds rate. This increase in interest rates leads to higher borrowing costs for consumers and businesses. As a result, individuals may think twice before taking out a loan to purchase a new car or finance a home, while businesses may scale back on expansion plans or delay capital investments. This reduction in borrowing and spending helps to cool down demand in the economy, putting downward pressure on prices and ultimately bringing inflation back within the Fed's target range. Conversely, if the economy begins to slow, with unemployment rising and GDP stagnant, the Fed may decide to decrease the federal funds rate. This drop in borrowing costs encourages individuals to take out loans for large purchases, while also encouraging businesses to invest in new projects and hire more people. By increasing demand in this way, the Fed hopes to boost economic activity and job creation, so supporting a strong labor market and long-term economic growth. The mechanism underlying the federal funds rate demonstrates the Federal Reserve's indirect control over short-term interest rates, which influences borrowing costs and, subsequently, economic activity. This rate is the interest rate at which banks lend to one another for overnight loans, allowing the financial sector to manage liquidity more efficiently. The Fed guides this rate by establishing target ranges using numerous tools at its disposal, including open market operations, discount rates, and interest on reserves. For instance, if the Federal Reserve aims to raise the federal funds rate, it may conduct open market operations by selling government securities. This drains excess reserves from the banking system, prompting banks to compete for scarce funds and push the federal funds rate higher. Conversely, if the Fed seeks to lower the federal funds rate, it can engage in open market purchases, injecting liquidity into the system and driving down borrowing costs. The impact of these rate changes on borrowing costs is significant and far-reaching. Even little changes in interest rates can influence consumer and company borrowing decisions, affecting anything from mortgage rates to credit card interest rates. For example, if the Fed raises interest rates, mortgage rates will undoubtedly rise, making owning less accessible and potentially decreasing demand for housing. Similarly, increased borrowing costs for corporations might result in decreased investment spending and slower employment development as companies become more cautious about expanding operations. In terms of inflation management, the Fed's rate adjustments play a crucial role in balancing supply and demand dynamics in the economy. By raising interest rates, the Fed aims to reduce demand for goods and services, thereby curbing inflationary pressures. For instance, if inflation starts to rise due to strong consumer spending, the Fed may respond by raising interest rates to discourage borrowing and spending, ultimately slowing down economic growth and bringing inflation back within target levels. However, it's important to note that there is often a time lag between rate adjustments and their impact on inflation and economic activity. For example, decisions such as home purchases may take several months to materialize as buyers navigate the housing market and secure financing. As a result, while the Fed's rate adjustments may take some time to fully influence inflation, consumers and businesses will feel the immediate impact of higher interest rates on loans, mortgages, and credit cards, leading to changes in spending behavior and investment decisions in the short term. In essence, the Federal Reserve's management of the federal funds rate represents a multifaceted endeavor aimed at steering the economy towards a path of stability, growth, and prosperity. Through its careful consideration of economic data and trends, the Fed endeavors to strike a delicate balance that serves the interests of all stakeholders, ensuring that the benefits of economic progress are shared broadly and equitably across society. With that, let's end the video. This is Visionomics signing out.